Before I get started, I do consulting on where you can move. I'll work with you to find the perfect place for you to move to. There's more information at the end of the video about that. Now let's get started. Now, I'd never been to Darlington, South Carolina before, but I thought I'd kinda like the place. I mean, it's southern, redneck, a little rough around the edges, and filled with NASCAR fans. Sounded like my kind of place. I had heard about how poverty-stricken and ghetto the place was, but I thought, can't be that bad. Well, I was wrong. Going into the trip to Darlington, I thought maybe I'd give the place a C plus or something. After visiting for an afternoon, I'd give the place a big old fat D. There's nothing interesting about the place, really. Outside of the NASCAR track on the outskirts of town, there's really not much to it. And it was just blocks and blocks of rundown homes and sorta still open businesses. The vibe here is nothing I would want to live in. I went to Darlington on Tuesday in mid-February of 2022. It was a fairly nice day. I mean, 75 degrees in winter sure is enjoyable. Here's what I saw. Darlington, Darlington, you're a scary place. You don't want to live here, but it's fun to watch the race. Hey! The reason I picked Darlington's because of its reputation. If you look at metrics online, not only is this a place with a lot of poverty, but the crime is super high. When you measure cities in South Carolina based on crime numbers per capita, there's no other place in the state with more robberies, assaults, and murders per person. Look at this map. Green is good and red is bad. I don't see any green on that map. Do you? So of course I had to go there. I mean, who doesn't want to see the most dangerous place in a state? My goal was to drive through the red areas where the crime is the worst. As you drive around these bad places, it's pretty clear. These people are broke. 1 in 5 residents of this city of 6,000 people lives in poverty, and the average resident here makes only about $23,000. That doesn't go very far in today's America, even in the deep south. And look at the home prices here. I filtered all the homes that had sold here within the last year by anything under $25,000. Many of the houses I drove past sold for $5,000. A couple of them sold for under $1,000. I'll show you those. But driving around, I understood why homes are so cheap here. It's rough, it's beat up, and it feels dangerous. Nothing like some of the large inner city hoods I've seen, but man, oh man, what a place. All the girls at the club got they Fucci on here. What about the crime? An article came out recently which talked about the spike in gun violence here in Darlington. The article crunched the numbers and determined there's more shootings per capita here in Darlington than in Chicago. This chart shows Chicago compared with other small cities in the Carolinas that have suffered a spike in crime. And look at Darlington. Another article went over how bad the crime is here and how scared and how frustrated residents are. One woman said since nobody else could stop the violence here, she started a community activist group called Stop the Violence. Maybe I can get a lot more parents to get involved and see what's going on with their kids, who they're hanging out with, why are they hanging out with these thugs and gangsters. It is just scary. You can't go places. You can't have your kids go places because you don't know what's going to happen. I hear you, lady. Darlington police think that many of the shootings are drug-related. You think? And like many small towns, Darlington PD is stretched thin. It's hard to keep good cops around. We'll get into why that is soon when we talk to our crime expert, but it's so bad here that the Darlington Police Department has had to turn to federal assistance for help. And it's not just shootings. Right now, there's a 1 in 10 chance you'll be robbed if you live here. A 1 in 10 chance that you'll have your car broken into, or you'll have your wallet stolen, or something taken from your home. That is a shame.
Typically, it's easier to run drugs or organize gangs in smaller towns than it is in big cities, Nick.
That's right, Mappy. In fact, I had a conversation with an expert on crime, and he basically said the same thing. Smaller towns have a unique aspect to them. And part of the reason these places are so dangerous is because they're small. Let's bring him in now to talk about that very topic. Okay, YouTube, joining me right now, we have a special guest. His name is Leonard Sipes, and he's the founder of crimeinamerica.net. Hi, Leonard.
Hey, Nick, how are you doing?
Now, you have a long list of accolades. Can you give everybody an idea on what your background is before we get started?
35 years of being the head of media relations for federal and state criminal justice agencies, former senior specialist for crime prevention for the Department of Justice's Clearinghouse, former director of public information for the National National Crime Prevention Council, plus lots of other stuff. I've been an associate professor. I've taught at the collegiate level for years.
So if anybody knows about crime, it's you.
I would like to think so. After decades and decades in the criminal justice system, responding to reporters' questions and also academic questions and questions from, quite frankly, police chiefs and concerned citizens.
So I wanted to go two different angles with this. One of them is going to be crime in general. One of them is going to be small town crime. The video that we're going to be in right now, I went to Darlington, South Carolina. It's pretty much one of the most dangerous places in the South. And I wanted to kind of get some perspective from you on how small towns can get so dangerous and why their numbers are so high. But before I get to that, just in general, what we're seeing right now in the United States are crime spikes that are higher than we've seen since the early 90s. What is going on in America right now?
Right now, we have massive protests, and some of those protests, a lot of them were very legitimate in terms of being concerned about what police officers did or did not do. And basically, we have one piece of research that involves hundreds of individual pieces of research referred to as metadata or meta-analysis or literature reviews that basically said that cops are basically backing off from proactivity. The literature reviews clearly state that proactive policing is what reduces crime. Everything else is iffy in terms of its research base. So if cops are not being proactive, if the protest basically said, hey, look, stay away from proactive policing. We disagree with you being aggressive in terms of the streets. Cops have heard this and they've heard it loud and clear, and they're backing off of proactive policing, and thus we have crime rates going up. We have thousands of cops leaving the job. We have huge reductions per the Police Executive Research Forum in terms of people who want to be police officers. We have cities all throughout the country who do not have enough police officers to respond to 911 calls. So we got a problem in the country, and it's convincing cops to go back to proactivity. And the cops are basically saying, no, put it in stone. Tell me exactly what it is you want from us. Don't beat around the bush. Tell us exactly what it is that you want, and we'll give it to you. But there's got to be concurrence at the community level in terms of what sort of law enforcement they want.
Yeah, I mean, not only are the police not enforcing the law as much, but then they get in and they're not being prosecuted. DAs are hesitant to prosecute, a lot of crimes. They're letting people out of prison. At one point it was COVID, and now it's just, we can't keep them in because it's not fair. And so it's frustrating for the police officers that are doing their job just to see the people that they just arrested yesterday back on the streets again. You've written that you feel the only way to prevent crime is by just enforcing the law, the rehab, the counseling, all the other stuff that goes with it that the left has been proposing as alternatives to policing. You say none of that works. It's just straight up enforce the law, lock people up, and that'll lower crime.
I'm all for rehabilitation programs in prison. I'm all for giving people mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, training them in terms of a job, giving them an educational experience. All I'm saying is that the data is not very supportive as to the ability for these programs to reduce crime. Do it for humanitarian reasons or rearrange how you're doing this. But at the moment, we're failing. So a lot of the things that we propose, a lot of the things that we talk about simply don't have a research base that they work. The only thing that clearly has a research base that it does work through multiple studies, through hundreds of studies that are done by the National Academy of Sciences and the Department of Justice is proactive policing. That's what we know works. Everything else may work. It might work. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I said lock them up and throw the key away. No.
Well, I'm not. I'm simply saying hold offenders accountable.
I know.
Hold them accountable. I mean, they just can't walk away from their crimes without any sense of accountability, and that's what's happening now.
Yeah.
I mean, the average time served for a violent offender per the U.S. Department of Justice, the average time served for a violent crime is less than 3 years.
But
I'm not quite sure that persuades anybody not to do anything.
Yeah, that's average, and most of the time, it sounds to me. I mean, I hear stories all the time. It's 6 months, they're back out on the streets for murder or attempted murder, or like aggravated rape or whatever the hell, and then they're back out, and then they just do it again. I don't know. We can't keep people locked up forever, but we do have boats that can go to Antarctica, and we can fill them up and ship them out there and let them. How you probably talk to a lot of police officers that are currently former or current, or agencies that are law enforcement agencies. How hard is it to get somebody to be a cop in America these days? I hear it's hard.
To get somebody to be a police officer?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not recommending to people who ask me, younger people, I'm not suggesting that they become police officers. I'm simply saying, look, until this blows by, and it will, everything's cyclical. You may want to consider another profession. It's scary. Being a cop is freaking scary. We have police officers throughout the country who are being murdered, who are being shot at, who are being assaulted. It's not a very pretty situation that we have right now.
So the small town thing, a lot of people think, oh, small towns are safe. They're not, many of them. In fact, if you look at statistics, you have a higher chance of being the victim of a robbery or an assault than you would in a small town, than you would in a major city. In fact, some of the smaller cities down in the South where I was at, like in Darlington, South Carolina, they're more dangerous per capita than some of the major cities that you hear about: New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle. What's your take on small town crime? Why is it so high? How do you feel about all that?
First of all, I want to validate your findings because I sent you a draft article that I'm coming out with, a review of data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and all they're trying to do is to figure out the best way of counting crime. And they were talking about the fact that, and they validate your observations, that there are areas, small towns, and even rural areas that are statistically speaking have higher rates of crime than big cities. In essence, what you have in big cities are large police agencies that can respond and deploy thousands of people on any given night. So if you go into small towns, if you go into rural areas, okay, so there are counties in the United States that put out 2 police officers a night versus New York City that puts out 10,000 people a night. So it really does get back to a matter of law enforcement and how much law enforcement, and do they have sufficient numbers of law enforcement. And small towns, we have drug dealers who are leaving large cities and moving into small towns and dealing in small towns because of the lack of law enforcement. So the small towns are, and in some cases, small towns and rural areas are being hit harder than major cities because they don't have enough cops.
Mm-hmm. How does a small town like Darlington, South Carolina, or many other places in South Carolina, how do they? It's just a matter of just hiring more cops? Is that it? I mean, is it that easy?
No, it's not that easy. I mean, look, in the bottom line analysis is that we as a society, we police ourselves. I mean, that's criminology 101. When I teach criminology, we police ourselves. Whether or not you beat your wife, whether or not you do heroin, whether or not you buy stolen goods, whether or not you beat up your friend with their beer bottle in a private setting, doesn't depend upon how many cops you have. It depends upon communities controlling themselves and what restrictions they put on each other. And you get into the smaller cities where there are very few police officers, and we're having a problem with the number of police officers that we currently have, and people aren't becoming cops. The smaller cities, the rural areas, the reason why they have higher rates of crime is because A, lack of community control over each other, and B, the lack of law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, so many small towns, you would think people would be able to police themselves. I mean, everybody knows everybody in some of these places. You can't, as a child, you can't throw a rock at a train passing by without your mom hearing about it the next day, and can't cut up in class without getting in trouble. You would think that being so close to one another and having your drama all over the place, that it would deter people from doing crimes, because you can't get lost in a city of 6,000 people, but that just doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, and again, remember, you have people who are taking advantage of smaller cities, of rural areas, and moving in and doing setting up meth labs. You have people who are setting up criminal conspiracies in terms of substance abuse or drugs. You have people who move into areas because they know that the level of law enforcement is not as stringent as it is in large cities. So in the smaller communities, yeah, I mean, you're going to find the kids throwing the rock at the train. Somebody's going to say to Aunt Mabel, I just saw your nephew throwing a rock at a train. I'll take care of that. I'll talk to his parents. That continues to happen. But, again, people are moving into smaller communities because of the fact that there is little law enforcement. And that's, I think, driving most of the crime that's happening in the smaller cities and in the rural areas. And the fact that the opportunities are simply greater because, again, the lack of law enforcement, and people feel safer in the smaller communities, so they don't lock their doors. There's a wide variety of reasons, but it is startling because I talk to a lot of reporters who are covering small city beats, and their rates of violence are going up considerably. So the community has got to come to grips with itself in terms of what's acceptable and what isn't, and enforce it amongst each other.
Yeah, it's too bad because, I talked to a lot of people who are thinking about moving, many of them from large cities or suburbs. And, they're frustrated because the cost of living and the high crime in big cities, it almost makes it so that they can't afford to move to a better big city because they're getting priced out. And I am trying to get them to start wrapping their head around the fact that maybe they move out to an exurb, maybe a half hour outside of a city, or even consider a small town that maybe is within an hour of whatever you need to do. I mean, a lot of people can work from home, but if these small towns, I mean, one of the advantages of a small town should be clearly affordability and safety. And if you can't even go out to a small town in America and feel like you're safe anymore, I don't know what we got left.
People are still moving into rural areas. People are still seeking that safer experience. And for many communities, it is a safer experience. I don't want to suggest that all small towns and all rural areas are dangerous. They're not. And remember, it's a matter of rates versus numbers. So, we have homicides in our area of West Virginia. I think there are 2 this year. So you can have rates increase dramatically, but the numbers themselves are rather small. People really feel a lot safer in smaller communities where there is a lot of informal social control. So that still exists. So I'm not going to try to persuade people not to move to smaller cities or not to move to rural areas. They just can't go into it thinking that they're going to be crime-free because they're not. And when you reached out to me in terms of rural areas and smaller cities, I said, well, that's Nick has put his finger on the pulse of something, because if you take a look at some of the lists that I put up in Most Dangerous Cities on crimeinamerica.net, you're going to see that the most dangerous cities aren't the Clevelands, aren't the Baltimores, aren't the New Yorks. They're smaller metropolitan areas. So there's been, and this is really not covered by the media at all. This is why I was so enthused about doing your program. There's a shift from larger cities to medium-sized cities to smaller cities, and in some cases to rural areas, which is why I sent you that article about substantiating the fact that you have smaller cities that are more dangerous than larger cities and rural areas that are more dangerous than large cities. So, we have a shift going on in terms of criminal activity in these smaller communities. And you're one of the very few, and I'm not just saying this to blow smoke up your derriere. I'm just simply saying that you truly observed the fact that very few others are observing, the fact that there is a shift in crime from larger cities to smaller cities.
Yeah, and that's sad. Again, I've been sitting here all enthusiastic about telling people that maybe they should start wrapping their mind mind around going to maybe smaller cities where they could be safe. And yeah, like you said, most small communities are fine, but you can't take for granted that you can pick and choose a small town and assume it's just going to be completely safe anymore.
No, you really do have to. And I have another article on my website about choosing where to live, and talk to the cops. They will talk to you. Call the crime analysis people. Talk to the police officers, and they'll tell you where the problems are, if there are problems. I mean, there are problems in every community in the United States. Again, I'm not suggesting that people not move from the larger cities to the smaller cities. We're talking about rates, and small increases in crime creates a higher percentage in terms of rates. So, and when you're talking about sheer numbers, I'd rather deal with a smaller community that went from 5 to 10 homicides. It's a 50% increase in homicides. It makes headlines at 50% increase in but it's 10 versus hundreds in larger cities.
800, yeah. I think Chicago.
So the sheer numbers are on the side of the smaller communities. The sheer numbers are on the side of rural areas, but rates seem to indicate that you have a growing problem in smaller cities and in suburban areas. That doesn't mean you shouldn't move there. It's simply saying that you have to be aware that there's a crime problem wherever it is that you go. Talk to local law enforcement and get a sense from them before you make that move.
You can just call, if I call small town sheriff's office, they're going to be honest with me and say, yeah, this place is out of control. Like, there's crimes all the time and it's going up and we can't keep it under wraps. I mean, are they really going to be honest with me on that?
We travel throughout the country, and before COVID at least. And don't hesitate to call the local police department and say, okay, we're in Niagara Falls, beautiful area. Are there areas that I need to be concerned about?
Niagara Falls, New York.
They always respond to me, but I always say, look, I'm an ex-cop. I'm going to be walking these areas with my wife. Help me out here. I'm quite sure that law enforcement will be more than happy to give you an overview, whether you're visiting or thinking about moving. And they will be honest in terms of areas that you may want to be concerned about and you may not want to be concerned about. The other beauty about small towns is that you can literally talk to the editor of the small town newspapers and they will give you the same information.
They will. Yes, they usually will. I'm just skeptical that if I were to just an average citizen saying, hey, my family and I'm thinking about moving to your little town, 8,000 people. We heard it's kind of dangerous. Is that true? That I'd get a straight answer from them. They might tell me certain neighborhoods to avoid, but I don't think they're going to be directly honest with me. I mean,
then you should try it. You should pick 10 cities.
I should actually.
10 cities and call them and report back to the rest of us as to your experiences and say, hey, I was told by this guy that I could call you and get a clear answer. We're thinking about moving to Mayberry. Is there anything about Mayberry that I should be concerned about?
Leonard Sipes, founder of crimeinamerica.net, and a lengthy resume of accolades from all the things that you've done. You've done our country a great service, and I hope people go to your website and learn more about the stuff that you're talking about. Are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. And I can also help you find your new house too. Email me and I'll work with you on not just helping you figure out where to move, but I can help you find your perfect home too. That's right. I know awesome, reliable agents all over the country, and I'd love to connect you to somebody who can help you search for that perfect home. Hey everyone. So it's pretty clear by now that elected leaders aren't going to help you. If you don't like what you saw in this video, demanding change won't work. You're going to have to do it on your own. If you want to be safe and want your community to be a place where people want to live, you're going to have to clean the place up yourselves. You're going to have to work with your friends and neighbors to lower crime. Politicians clearly don't care as much anymore. It's up to us.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.